Hi everyone, this is Kristen Newton, Marketing Director at PMR, and you're listening to our podcast, The Blue Table Talk. On today's episode, we are discussing the pros and cons of converter pricing apps. The purpose of this conversation is to dive deep into what information you should be made aware of when using these apps. If you're currently using multiple applications to purchase and evaluate converter units, this is the podcast for you. Today, we have our sales team, Cliff Hope, Ryan Carafiello, discussing this topic, and our Supplier Services Director, Melissa Sullivan, moderating. Without further ado, let us begin.
Well, welcome everybody to the second episode of our podcast here at PMR. Today I am with Ryan and Cliff.
How's it going?
Hi, I'm Melissa. And today we are going to be talking about the pros and cons of different apps that are out there in the market for pricing converters, databases, and all those types of good things. So let's just jump right in. I'll go to you first, Cliff. Do you think that the market is saturated? Do you think that there are too many apps and databases out there?
I'm going to say that overall, yes. We've hit a point where there's too many pay-to-use apps that aren't necessarily developed using the best practices of putting information. And I think Ryan can confirm with me that when apps and databases on converters are developed, you need to follow proper methodology to understand the loadings of converters. And there are some companies out there that may not be using the best methods. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say of the older companies that had a master catalog 5-10 years ago, those companies probably really understand how to do it in terms of adding that specific converter in with an assay of just that converter. I think in the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's been a lot of the opposite, companies that don't have laboratories that maybe just paid a programmer, an IT person to put together a website with catalog numbers and prices. And I just feel like sometimes they're dictating our two different types of prices.
Absolutely. And if we talk about that methodology, first off, when a company puts a converter into a database, they need to take that piece, dismantle it, weigh the ceramic, crush it, commingle it, sample it, get it into a laboratory that has proper methodology for understanding the loading of that converter to come up with a market-based price.
For sure.
And what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing out there, are many companies that are exaggerating pricing on certain pieces. Perhaps they didn't have the right methodology. And that makes it very challenging for anybody who's actually buying converters on the front line.
So what do you think, you talk about some older type companies that built these databases 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Do you think that they should be evolving over time? I know, I would imagine that things are changing constantly over time. So how important is it to be using something that is looking at current loadings, not just things from 10, 12 years ago?
Sure. Well, everything is a cycle, right? So a car is going to have a 10 to 15 year lifespan. So you almost need to be adding in converters on a daily basis. So 2-3 years down the road, it's going to get a little bit more active or, accurate with current market. And then 10-15 years, you really have to almost clean up the older stuff that you won't see anymore, because that's the only way to keep it current. So yeah, if you're not updating it and currently evaluating your master catalog in your database, it's not going to be that accurate.
And what do you think the difference is for the different types of companies that are putting these databases and apps together? So let's say you're working with a pricing tool that's not a toll refiner. So it's a company that's buying converters versus a toll refiner putting together, pricing. What do you think the differences would be?
Well, once again, how long has that company been in business? What's the methodology they're using to look at converters? What's the size of their database? Are they looking at averages? Because I think we can say very clearly that every converter lives a different life. It could have been delivered in different parts of the country, the world for that matter, that have different loading requirements, or should we say environmental standards for the delivery of that converter. And to have that kind of longevity and methodology to analyze that material is really important. If it's not done correctly, you could be over-evaluating it or under-evaluating it.
I think you got to understand what that company does in terms of purchasing, right? Because if they're purchasing strictly by piece, no assay, then they can post a price for a serial number that essentially they would like to pay. But from our experience, those tend to be on the lower end of the range, because there is always a range, because a converter doesn't live the same life. So I think you have to understand, is the converter actually, or is the company actually processing and toll refining to give you an assay value versus a per unit price? And then on the flip side, if they are assaying, let's say like a company like us, we're posting what that specific converter is worth from that area. It could be from Canada, US, Mexico, Australia. It could be from all over the place. And I don't think a lot of people understand that that price that shows an assay is not necessarily the price that they're holding in that particular converter in their hands, right? And it's a challenge to them, because they're seeing a picture, they're seeing a serial number, they're matching it together and said, I should receive X. But that's not really how it works. And I think it's more of an education thing to understand that, so they're not pushing the buyers, so some of our suppliers, to raise their price when essentially they don't have to.
Well, and even more so, there are companies that are pushing apps out there in a pay-for-use type of environment. They're not actually buying the converters.
Yeah.
And to use that information to leverage strong arm somebody into giving a higher price at a scale, at a place of business, it's very difficult, because the guys that are paying money for the material in front of them are taking a risk at the actual value of that cat. So it's really important that they factor those risks in. Obviously, pay a fair price, but some understanding that there is no specific set price on a price list unless they are actually buying by the piece.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, what I've seen a lot of times is they put lost leaders out there.
Yeah.
Common, very valuable converters that they don't mind overpaying for.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in order to keep a profit margin, there's pieces that just don't have identifiable numbers that they really don't pay nearly as much for.
Yeah.
So there's no magic wand in it. It's a price list just like the old days.
Yeah. I think it's really important to understand the size of the master catalog or the database, because if you have 2,000-3,000 converters in a database, which current day that's not a lot, you're not going to have a lot of hits. And even if you have hits, you're going to have one result, right? So if you have a database that has 20,000-30,000 plus, you might have a range or multiple analysis of that unit. It makes you feel a little bit more confident to purchase that, because you could be sitting in North Dakota, let's say a region with worse weather, worse climate, more wear and tear, maybe lower value converters, but you might be looking at an analysis from California that's going to be 30% over national average. So that converter, doesn't really show what it could be worth in that region. So I think you also have to ask the question, like, can these databases be tailored? Can you, look at the national average or national state values per region, per country? If you can, evaluate that and customize it up or down, then I would say it's something, exciting to work with. But if you don't really know those answers, or it's pretty tough to understand where that price point's coming from.
Well, let's say it really clearly from the frontline perspective. When somebody's buying those converters in North Dakota, and somebody comes along with a pay-for-use app that we can't reliably say where the information's coming from and trying to push them for a price point, it just doesn't make sense. And in that case, and in most cases, the market becomes saturated. So if people are selling converters by the unit to somebody that would sell to a toll refiner, they need to understand that the pricing that they're working with, or the pricing that they're giving them, is really what they can get back with an expected margin for their own profit. Nobody's in this business to lose money, and that's sometimes what the apps out there are doing.
Yeah, and I think being on the trade show route this year, talked to a lot of different people, and one of the things I'm really noticing that's more prevalent than before, let's say going back 2 or 3 years, is using multiple apps now. So what do you think some of the traps of using multiple apps to both buy and sell your converters?
I think it's going to confuse some people, right? Because you're going to have different apps and different companies that develop it in different ways, like we just spoke about. So you might see even within the same app, you could see a $200-$300 swing from the same serial number high to low. Then you grab another app in the mix, and you have different price points. I think it's going to get a little bit confusing. But I think what some of these guys are doing is they're going to take the apps and basically run the higher number between either or, and try to push their buyer to say, hey, look what this is worth. I want this price. So I think it makes it tough.
Well, and even more to that point, sometimes we see sellers at the ground level who have bought from multiple apps or information that they're getting, and they push that material in different directions, thinking that because this app said this converter was higher and this app said this converter was better, so they make groupings and they push those out, maybe by piece, maybe by assay, and they're never really satisfied because they're not getting the full value of the material in any way. Regardless of what toll refiner you're working with or is out there, sending larger volume of material that is inclusive of everything that's purchased is really going to pay the most.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about reliability. So should you be able to rely on prices you're seeing off of an app or a database, Ryan?
I think it comes to, are you selling it by piece or by assay? So that's the first question. I think if you're selling on assay, you have to use it with a grain of salt that it's still a guide, right? Everyone looks at these prices and because it shows a nice picture or a real-time price that's what I'm going to get for that converter. So I think it's just understanding that that's really not the case. And if you just use the information to the best of your knowledge and make an educated decision if you're going to even buy that converter, I think it's a good tool, but everyone's got to kind of get out of their head that this is exactly what they're going to receive for that converter.
Well, then the next part of that is, are you selling by the piece to somebody with this app and you have agreed upon prices? Did the market change today? Is it up? Is it down?
Yeah.
Was their app flexible enough to reflect market changes? So if you bought at a specific market and then you go and sell by the piece in another one, if the market went down, you're not getting the same thing. So apps need to be, I'm going to say, way more transparent in what's there, what people can expect back from them, how to use them. If the pay-per-use apps aren't giving very clear outlines of how they were developed, what they should be used for, what markets or where that material, that information's coming from, I think it's detrimental to a buyer and a seller on both sides.
Yeah.
And what about the difference between these databases and apps that are displaying either a range or a set price? So what are some pros and cons? Cliff, I'll go to you first. What are some pros and cons on working with a tool that's only using set prices?
Set prices, now if we're talking in the context of somebody has a set price and the piece is going to be bought at that price in that market, it's a pretty straightforward and easy thing to use. But there's very, very few out there that are operating this way because the market is so volatile, because of things that are beyond the buyer's control.
But hold on, I think set price, we have to define that.
Yeah, well, this notion of set prices, I mean, are we talking about...
I think what she's meaning more is it one, I think you need to say average price versus range price.
But some don't even give that. Do they just offer one? Is it an average or is it a range? Right. So I mean, we can talk about all of those things. So I mean, if we talk, and we'll just flow right back into this. If we're talking about set price, we need to actually expand that question. Is it a set price? Is it an average price? Or is it a range? And different apps, depending on the volume, or we'll talk about the number of database entries they have, could give a range or could give an average price. And maybe if it's a newer app on the market, maybe they only have one, which is far less reliable.
If they're just giving one price because they've only have one analysis, Well, you just need to understand that. So you can factor that into your play. But if it's a range or if it's an average, you really have to understand how they're displaying that to you. So,
and I think some of the bigger challenges too, the marketplace with inflated metal prices, let's say over the last couple of years, has got a lot of new people into the industry looking for information, trying to make a buck. They don't have that buying experience that established toll refiners understand, that even established buyers, because there's certainly a big difference with somebody who's been in the market 10 years plus, buying converters, using information, selling to a toll refiner. They fully appreciate that a price point in an app is really a guide.
Yeah.
Then we have people that are new into the market that really don't understand that price point is just that guide, not a guarantee, and then expect to, if I see it at $200, if I buy it for $190, I'm going to get $10.
Yeah.
And that's a big mistake in this marketplace.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I feel this is just kind of us talking, but a lot of the questions and the points were almost like talking about the same. It's like one general big topic. That's how I'm feeling, right? Because I'm going somewhere that's going to kind of hit an older point. But like my thing was most of the apps that have popped up in the last couple of years, they are from companies that essentially don't process their own materials or, even have a database or a lab to take those values from, right? So it's pretty simple, right? Like, let's just say for us, for example, if we have the ability to customize prices for regions. But if we just went and raised prices across the board 30% on all numbers, and someone's searching, the first thing they're going to say is, wow, PMR's prices are the best. But when they actually use our tools and then process with us and they don't see those exact prices or returns and they lose money, they're not going to want to deal with us. But that's the problem. If you're not buying the converter, right, you're just seeing prices, and the company obviously wants to post a higher price. So the perception is that they pay more, but essentially these people that are using these apps, they don't even know where these companies are coming from. You go on their websites and they don't even really show you where they're from, their building, their physical address. So it's like, it's hard to really take that price for any value if you really don't know anything about this company. Good features of a database.
100%.
So
what do you think some features of a good database or application
Well,
are?
I think you really need to, the first thing is you need to know if that price is coming off current market or not, right? So I think a good app should show you the market that it's basing the prices off. And then you should be able to enter somewhere that can put in a different market, maybe higher or lower. So if you're really trying to compare apples to apples from another month or whatever, you should be able to key that in. Obviously, putting in some sort of margin would be very valuable. So if you're buying converters, you don't have to do the math on your calculator every single time. So I think those are the two that would stand out to me initially that you would probably want in a database.
I'd also be looking for a database that's robust, that has 30, 40,000 plus entries into it. If you can only search 3, 4, 5,000 numbers, there's a lot more material out there that, with numbers or not. And if you don't have that kind of depth in a database, really you're relying on I'm going to say not the full picture.
Yeah, for sure.
So a database should either give ranges, averages, and have enough in those averages to actually give a real touch point on what the value of pieces are.
Yeah, for sure.
So how are converters evaluated to land in an app or a database?
So if the company is actually doing it correctly, they're taking a converter, identifying a serial number, dismantling the unit, weighing the ceramic, crushing it, commingling it, taking the sample from it, and putting it through a rigorous laboratory process that gives us the loadings of platinum, palladium, rhodium, and then an app that's really worth its salt, let's say, is able to take current market pricing, and apply it to those loadings in the converter. Now, we have to keep in mind that it's just going to be that converter. And there are many companies out there that are creating apps that don't necessarily have the correct methodology to evaluate the material. They're not following the proper steps. They're taking the wrong portions or the wrong samples to come up with that pricing. And this is where the waters get muddied. The next problem that occurs in that is that if it's just one unit, it's just that unit that the company identified for a price point in a given market. Converters, by their nature, they last 10, 15 years on a vehicle. They have different lives and can swing easily 10 to 20% plus or minus, depending on how that converter's been used.
So essentially what you're saying is that you could have an app that has the price evaluated from one unit when at the time of manufacturing, there were thousands of that exact same unit created, but you're now evaluating it against just one unit.
And not just one unit that had a very specific life cycle. The unit that was evaluated, is it a car that got wrecked after a year of use, 6 months of use, or 16 years of use? So that type of evaluation is going to swing it, once again, up to that plus minus 15, 20%. So having first off, multiple of the same unit analyzed, averages or ranges, is a much better evaluation tool that sets an expectation for return. And even in those expectations, we have to understand when purchasing the piece, it needs to be margined in a way that the purchaser can actually profit from the purchase and sale of that material. And I think a lot of the apps that are out there don't offer that insight and actually give false expectations to sellers, to people who will eventually toll refine that material.
Brian, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, essentially, doing a single analysis is just a very small version of how a company should process a load, right? You're basically gonna, weigh up the material. You're gonna get the parts per million from the laboratory analysis. You're gonna document everything. So, I think it's just a very small way of doing it. But again, companies can't do it every single converter because it's way too time consuming, right? So I think it's very important to have multiple analysis of the same serial number and provide as much information as you can, showing if it's a range, if it's an average, which country it came from. And if you can really even break it down, what state or which province it came from, that helps. But it shouldn't be used more than just a guide.
Well, and even in that, I mean, this is where that evaluation, and we talk about the questioning of who's created the app.
Yeah.
Is it a company that's been in business for 25 plus years,
Yeah.
or is it somebody that came into the business 3 years ago and doesn't necessarily have the history and the methodology to accurately reflect converter values?
Yeah.
Right? Are they using a proper toll refining method, or are they just selling another app to make money month on month, as opposed to actually helping a buyer evaluate material?
Because how many conversations have we had that they pull up a serial number, it's some super high, ridiculous price, and maybe they compare it to ours or another app that has a 30% difference, right? But when you ask them, can you sell that converter and can they guarantee you that price? The answer is always no, right? So,
inevitably.
So what's the point of using that as a basis if really you can't prove or back that up? Mm-hmm. So I think that's important.
Well, it just becomes a barter system that really doesn't help anybody. It narrows margins. It doesn't keep legitimate business owners actually helping people, sell and then resell that material.
But I think something we haven't really touched on, it's from the yard perspective. Years and years ago, no one really wanted to give out information, right? So I think it's good for maybe a yard or a facility to use information where they've never received information from their buyer ever. The buyer held in the information. Maybe it was a core buyer, maybe it was another company that they made their money off having this data, right? So I think for them, it's great. I can pay X amount and get the information. But I think as we talked about, you almost want a one-stop shop. You want to work with a company that actually develops the catalog themselves. And then you almost need to sell that converter or that load to them to help them even build the database even and more and work together to really get the tool working as best as you can. But I think that's where it comes from. A lot of places are quick to pay for an app just because it's like, oh, I get easy information, but information is out there. But I say it again and again, like working with the right company that's going to help you through the process.
Well, there's nothing easy about creating these databases. It takes time, it takes dedication, it takes proper methodology.
Yeah.
And having that information is usually going to come from a toll refiner that's been in business for a long time.
Yeah.
So evaluating who you're doing business with, is it something that makes you feel good as you're getting more?
Yeah.
Not usually. Not usually. Anything that looks too good to be true and is too new and not tried and tested, really is there value to that? No, this is where we get into there's just too many apps on the market.
Yeah, for sure. Just kind of different direction. But, let's just say for us, like we analyze converters in two different ways, right? If we're going through a load, we're going to pull out a piece that we have no information on. We're going to let our supplier know, and we're going to add it to the catalog. But in reverse, they might notify us and say, hey, I'm seeing this time and again. You guys don't have this number. Can we analyze that? So I think that's also a question to ask back to these companies. Could you send in some of your own converters to help them build their database and actually use their information?
Absolutely, and get a really good, accurate answer.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure a lot of these pay apps are using prices or analysis that really has nothing to do with the companies that are actually providing the material, and even if they're even providing material in the first place.
Right. So a lot of important questions to ask. How long have they been in business? How big is the database? Do they have a lab on site that is actually giving proper feedback on loadings in specific converters?
Yeah.
And if they can't answer those questions to your satisfaction, perhaps move on, stop paying for the app, start making money with a company that's actually processing the material as well.
So how many times have we've gotten the question asked, like, hey, can I just pay you guys to use it? And our answer is always going to be the same thing. No, because we're not in the business to make money off that. We would like to do some reciprocal business and get your converters. But we're all in it together. We want to help build our database to provide a better overall service and price points for our suppliers. But I think it's an important point.
Well, and we can't do that if our suppliers aren't making money. So we need to give accurate, truthful information that puts a proper expectation of return with enough information that purchaser on the front lines can make the right purchasing decision on a specific piece.
Excellent. Well, we've come to the end of our time here now. Did either of you have any final thoughts on this subject before we close up for today?
I would just say, when you're really evaluating a service or an app, let's just say you really have to ask all those questions that we spoke about to really understand where the prices are coming from, how that company operates. If you don't and you're just looking at it as a number, it's going to be a little misleading.
And I'm going to say similarly, if people are going to rely on an app and they are selling in a toll refining environment, they really just need to sell everything to that one place. They need to buy everything that comes across their doorstep. And this can be uncomfortable at times where other apps show higher results than what that company's database might be. Sometimes you may have to reach for those pieces and include them in your assays. Because if you're only getting the lower end or different spectrums of the purchasing ability out there, you're really not getting the full value of a toll refiner.
Ryan, any other thoughts on that?
Because I didn't even know what I was going to say, so I had to laugh.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you both very much for your time today. And to our listeners, thanks for listening.